Heesoo looked slightly puzzled by the sudden pull on her arm before glancing down and finding herself face to face with a teddy bear rather than a person. Taeha stood there, holding it out to her as if presenting a hostage during a negotiation. She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or question him. He explained in a serious tone that he had come to rescue her because she seemed in distress. She stared at him, increasingly confused, her fingers instinctively wrapped around the stuffed bear. Its fabric surprisingly soft. She muttered softly that it was cute, though she hadn't meant to compliment him. Tilting her head, she asked if it was the same teddy bear she used to sleep with. She stopped herself, then quickly brushed the idea away with a yawn. Looking closer, she noticed the crooked stitching on its belly, the threads uneven, as if someone had sewn it while being chased. He stated that it was a gift and confidently declared that if she slept with it, she'd never have nightmares again. She looked at him, slightly stunned by the sincerity in his voice. Slowly, she realized he had made it himself. The realization brought back an old memory she hadn't expected to surface at such a strange time. She remembered standing in front of a pile of toy stuffing years ago, when Meal had walked by and asked what she was doing staring at something so childish. He had sarcastically asked if she was trying to make herself look cute, despite her age. He even told her, mockingly, to remember her place and avoid doing things that didn't suit her anymore. She remembered the embarrassment she felt back then, quickly moving away from the pile while muttering apologies. The memory faded as she drew the teddy bear closer and hugged it tightly. She whispered a faint "thank you," barely audible but sincere. Taeha simply nodded, as if he hadn't expected anything less. After a long silence, Taeha admitted that he had run away mostly because he didn't feel like working. He leaned against Heesoo with an exaggerated sigh and asked if she wanted to run away with him. She gave him a look meant to be stern but that seemed more amused. She remarked that adults didn't run away from work. He immediately replied that in that case, what he was doing wasn't running away, it was kidnapping. Before she could protest, he lifted her up and threw her over his shoulder like a sack of rice. She screamed in surprise, demanding he put her down while pounding on his back in frustration. Meanwhile, at Heesoo's workplace, Jay put on an apron. The shop owner, surprised to see him again, muttered if he was back to replace another employee like last time. She eyed him and commented that at this rate, he was going to get too attached. She asked why he didn't just work full-time there. Jay laughed and said he was part of the premium workforce, pretending to be far too valuable to be tied to one establishment. The owner smirked and warned him that once business picked up, he wouldn't have the luxury of sneaking out for smoke breaks. She mentioned she had seen him smoking earlier. Even though the shop wasn't open yet, she suggested he go smoke now before she changed her mind about letting him loiter around. He followed her outside, amused by her attitude, leaning against the wall, cigarette between his fingers. He exhaled silently. He watched the street absent-mindedly, mumbling that while some people went out on romantic dates, others were scrubbing grates. He chuckled softly, thinking that people who had someone to love seemed not to care about the rest of the world. He concluded that such people were better left alone than dragged into unnecessary trouble. As smoke drifted from his lips, Jay's eyes narrowed suddenly. He sensed a nearby presence and quickly turned around, startled to see someone emerging from the shadows. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Taeha was escorting Heesoo down the street. Unaware of anything unusual, Heesoo walked beside him. Lost in thought, she noticed that when she walked alone, she was always the first to step aside for others. But now, walking next to Taeha, the passersby moved aside for them without hesitation, even apologizing as they passed. She looked at him, slightly annoyed. Something about the situation seemed absurd and unfair. Her gaze drifted to his collar, and she suddenly froze. His shirt was partly unbuttoned, revealing marks on his neck. She narrowed her eyes and ordered him to lower his head. He looked confused but obeyed, without warning. She reached out and rebuttoned his shirt. Taeha complained that it was suffocating, but she ignored him. He sighed lightly, trying to breathe while Heesoo muttered under her breath about what people might think seeing him like that. A group of girls passed by. Glancing at Taeha and his appearance, one whispered that he looked dangerously attractive, another immediately scolded her, calling her crazy. Heesoo heard every word. Feeling both irritated and unsettled, she told Taeha to lower his head again and button the last button a little too forcefully. Taeha smirked mischievously and accused her of playing with his shirt on purpose. She jumped. Startled, he teased her further, reminding her that she was the one who had unbuttoned it earlier. Their bickering continued as a shadow followed them discreetly. Meanwhile, Jay observed the customers carefully, noting internally that people in the same line of work could recognize each other instantly. It wasn't hard to spot the little details: their posture, their eyes, the way they reacted to sudden movement, pretending to drop a glass bottle. He watched as the old man beside him caught it effortlessly before it hit the floor. Jay recognized the reflex immediately. He narrowed his eyes. The old man warned him to be more careful, saying he could have hurt himself. Jay kept a polite smile while mentally noting his movements. He started to walk away, but the shop owner asked where he was going. She added that she hoped he wasn't planning to run off just because things were getting tough. Jay smiled and replied that he was just going out for a smoke. Once outside, Jay didn't waste time. He shoved the old man against the wall in one swift motion. Grabbing the back of his head, he growled that he'd spent all day scrubbing grates and demanded to know who had sent him. The old man smiled faintly, amused. Jay cursed inwardly, realizing that the strange feeling he'd had earlier wasn't paranoia, it had been intentional. Someone had wanted him to notice. He wondered whether the target was him or someone else. That same moment, Taeha turned into a narrow alley. He noticed 3 figures standing still, making far too much noise for people trying to blend in. He sensed that they wanted to be noticed. Before he could decide what to do, Heesoo called his name. He turned and bent slightly. Feigning casualness, he hesitated between intervening or ignoring the situation. He had trained himself to suppress his reflexes in public. Since Heesoo was there, he decided it was better to avoid confrontation unless things got truly serious. To his surprise, Heesoo suddenly grabbed his wrist and told him to run. He stared at her, bewildered, asking how she knew. She just shouted for him to hurry. As they sprinted through the dark streets, Heesoo's thoughts raced. She realized that people who had spent their lives being hunted could recognize that look in someone else instantly. He had always carried that look, she remembered. His scars like golden cracks across his skin, imperfect but resilient. His breathing often sounded heavy, as if weighed down by something invisible. She didn't know when it happened, but at some point, she had started to feel his pain as if it were her own. Footsteps echoed close behind them. She wondered what kind of people were chasing them: debt collectors or something worse. Maybe he had gotten involved in something dangerous to pay off a debt. With growing unease, she realized the street was becoming darker and quieter. Most of the shops were closed. She silently cursed herself for not leading them somewhere more crowded. She wondered what they should do, what they were supposed to do now. The footsteps followed them until they finally stopped near a love hotel, the tension in the night growing even heavier.